Yep. Yep. That's right. We're going to read the article right now. 1212. Yes. Folks, I came across this article and I just had to share it with you. I thought it was super interesting. I already read through it, but we're going to read through it again and get all of the nitty gritty details. So, cloud versus on prem. SaaS vendor 37Signal bails out of the public cloud. 37Signals CTO claims dumping infrastructure as a service cloud services in favor of buying servers can save millions of US dollars per year for the right type of organization. Does that sound interesting or what? Let's dive into this article, okay? All right, this article is written by Neil Weinberg. You can get this on Network World. And what I'll do is I'll make sure that the article is linked with this video wherever I post it, whether it be on LinkedIn or Facebook or on YouTube. All right, let's go. Came out today, March 23rd, 3 a.m. Pacific. Let's get down to it. All right, so there we are. All right, let's go. So David Heimer Hansen, sorry if I pronounced that name incorrectly, co-owner and CTO of SaaS vendor 37Signals, is quitting the cloud and wants everyone to know about it. In a series of blog posts, Hansen has challenged the cloud business model, rebutted assumptions associated with cloud computing, and argued that the consolidation of power among hyperscalers is not necessarily a good thing. It might seem counterintuitive for a SaaS vendor to be publicly taking potshots at the cloud and suggesting that other companies reconsider their cloud investment. Has Hansen, the creator of Ruby on Rails, gone off the rails? Hansen's argument is simple. By pulling server workloads off the Amazon AWS infrastructure, purchasing new hardware from Dell, and running his business from a co-location facility, he will save millions of dollars. Like I said, I read through this article. I felt like if there was a good point to be made. And so as we go through it, you'll get into the details, and I'd love to hear what you all think. He says, we've run extensively in both Amazon's cloud and Google's cloud. We've run on bare virtual machines. We've run on Kubernetes. We've seen all the cloud has to offer and tried most of it. It's finally time to conclude renting computers is mostly a bad deal for medium-sized companies like ours with stable growth. And I want to highlight that this part right here where he says stable growth. He's gonna come back to this a bit. I know many people might say medium-sized companies is something that you should look at too, but especially the part where he says stable growth. The savings promised in reduced complexity never materialized, so we're making our plans to leave. He adds that the cloud makes total sense for retailers and other companies that experience dramatic traffic spikes. After all, that's how AWS came into being in the first place. When Amazon built out excess capacity for the holiday season, then decided to start renting out that idle hardware. But the workloads have to be super bursty. And that's his main argument on this, right? That if you don't really have bursty workloads, if you don't really have a dramatic shift in traffic spikes, etc., that he's saying that you might be better off not in cloud environment as far as infrastructure as a service. Let's continue on. He argues that for the majority of enterprises with relatively stable workloads, if you are spending significant amounts of money in the cloud and don't at least consider benchmarking your rental bill versus buying servers, you're being a bit reckless, which is a good thing, right? There's always a new widget. There's always people who have their particular perspectives, but are you looking at the data? Are you actually doing modeling? Are you actually doing testing? And are you actually looking at the results and seeing if that particular solution works for you? So I like his method into this. So let's say, so this article goes on, do the math. 37 Signals sells 2 SaaS offerings. Basecamp, that's a very popular one, a project management application launched in 2004, and Hey, a premium email service launched in 2020. Basecamp has been run mostly from co-location facilities, and Hey was totally cloud-based until Hansen began running the numbers. So here's an actual AWS customer that has one business that is in a co-location type setup and architecture, and another business that's in the cloud. So this, to me, they are well positioned to be able to really compare apples to apples, not bottom line to bottom line, and conclude if they're really getting a benefit from being in the cloud. The company spent $3.2 million on AWS cloud services in 2022, with just under $1 million on Amazon S3 storage and the remaining $2.3 million on application servers, cache servers, database servers, search servers, etc. The plan is to eliminate that entire $2.3 million expenditure in 2023 and to tackle the 8 petabyte of stored data in 2024. So let's remember that 2.3 million. Sorry, 3.2 million in 2022. After much deliberation, many benchmarks, and much awing at the speed of AMD's new Zen 4 chips combined with Gen 4 NVMe drives, Hansen says he ordered Dell servers to the tune of around $600,000. Go Dell. All right. Amortized over 5 years, that comes to around $120,000 a year for server infrastructure. He spends an additional $60,000 a month or $720,000 annually for 8 dedicated racks in 2 data centers operated by a co-location provider named Deft. We purposely, he said, over-provisioned our space so we can actually fit all of these many new servers in the existing racks without needing more space or power. His total expenditure comes to $840,000 per year. Going back up, and he says it, well, I don't have to go back up. $840,000 per year compared to 2.3 million. So 840,000 compared to 2.3 million in the cloud. That is a significant, that's about 60+%, for a net savings of about 1.5 million a year or 7 million over 5 years. And we'll have much faster hardware, many more cores, incredibly cheaper NVMe storage, and room to expand at a very low cost, he adds. What are y'all thinking so far? Hansen says he has already begun migrating applications off the AWS platform and expects the process to be completed over the summer. He adds that the actual migration is no simple task. His team has had to build its own tooling to make sure that key features and innovations built into his applications would port over to the new hardware and run with the same performance. When I read that, I was like, you see, well, there's a lot of complexity to do this. Not everybody can do this. But then, let's continue reading. The complexity of figuring out the nuts and bolts of application repatriation raises the question of whether the experience of a SaaS vendor like 37 Signals, with an employee roster brimming with technical expertise, is applicable to the average enterprise. That's what I asked. Let's see. Some question and Hansen's answers. Hansen has been active on social media, engaging in conversations about that very issue. He seems to have an answer for every concern. So let's listen. What about maintenance, monitoring, operations? Will I need to hire more IT staffers to run these servers that I now own? Hansen argues that he will not need to add any positions to his 10-person operations staff. 10 persons. He says IT teams can remotely manage servers no matter where they live. He goes on to say that cloud vendors have made the case that moving to the cloud would enable organizations to reduce their IT staff. But Hansen says those savings never actually materialize. What happens if a server dies? Hansen's answer might sound glib, but he says just buy a new one. He points out that he's currently running servers that are 6, even 7 years old, which means they have been fully paid off and are still functioning. Great return on investment there. We run it until it can't run no more. Then we upgrade, he says. How about security? Whether you run your apps in rented hardware or your own, you have to worry about security. That's true. It doesn't really make any difference there. You have a responsibility for your security. What about installation, configuration, etc.? Dell delivers the servers to the co-location facility. The dev team sets them up with connectivity, power, etc., and his team never touches hardware. Your team has years of experience running your own servers. What about companies that have never done it before? Hansen says that organizations ran their own servers for decades before the cloud came along. And today's servers hardware is more reliable, more automated, and easier to manage than in the past. You don't need to know nuclear secrets to do it, he says. And to be clear, he's not suggesting that companies build their own data centers. He's simply advocating for buying servers versus renting them. All right. So you're going to buy the car or you're going to lease the car? Which is more economical over time in your particular situation? So again, he's not suggesting that companies build their own data centers. I should put this in red. He's not suggesting that companies build their own data centers. He's simply advocating for buying servers versus renting them. Is cloud really the future? Hansen said that when he talks to people about his decision, the first assumption that he has to challenge is a notion that the cloud is the future. And if you're not all in on the cloud, then you're somehow missing the boat or living in the past. Hansen says he has been trying to wrestle that narrative away from the cloud evangelists. Another assumption is that the cloud is somehow vendor neutral, that there's no lock-in. The reality is that, for example, cloud vendors offer lower rates to customers who sign storage contracts for longer periods of time. And each cloud vendor has their own tool set. So an organization with a hybrid cloud or multi-cloud environment is faced with the complexity of learning a different set of skills for each platform. Hansen also challenges organizations to investigate the dramatic price drop for storage and the dramatic performance increases associated with today's chipsets. He says cloud service providers don't pass those efficiencies in server and storage hardware back to the customer. Instead, they keep their profit margins high. How should organizations proceed? Hansen recommends this approach. I would start by simply raising the discussion internally. What kind of business do we have? Do we have a highly volatile business where we have these huge surges? Or we're a very early stage business where we can entirely get away without an operations team? Or are we perhaps in the middle, just like 37Signals, where we might not yet be spending $3 million a year like they are, but maybe we're already spending $1 million a year, or maybe we're even spending $500,000 a year. He says companies should be asking themselves, what would it cost us to buy some servers? How long would it take us to pay that back? And if we could end up in a situation like 37Signals, as with Basecamp, where they're still running on servers they bought 7 years ago, how much more profitable could our operations be? Great questions to ask. 37 Signals fights hyperscale's internet dominance. Hansen goes on to make Hansen goes on to makes another more philosophical argument in favor of moving off the hyperscale platforms. This isn't just about cost, it's also about what kind of internet we want to operate in the future. It strikes me as downright tragic that this decentralized wonder of the world is now largely operating on computers owned by a handful of mega corporations. That's an argument also for Web3. Hansen says the reaction among his peers has been mostly positive. I'm simply articulating wisdom that is already there, Hansen says. One person, Hansen, and this one got me. I don't know if it's going to get you. One person Hansen has not heard from directly is Amazon's Jeff Bezos, who is actually an investor and part owner of 37 Signals. But Hansen says, I'm 100% convinced he's in our corner when it comes to getting our costs as low as they can be. When you're an investor, it's different from when you're an owner, right? So, hey, you want your investment, you want their cost down so that you can reap the profit when you're an investor. So I just thought that was super interesting. That needs to be circled. Let me circle it. Yep. Let me underline it. Amazon's Jeff Bezos, who's an investor of the same company, 37 Signal, who's like, I'm done with AWS. We basically have been able to do a side-by-side comparison with two of our companies, one in co-location, one on AWS. And based on what we've seen, co-location is better for us. And so I like the steps that were taken in this. You can hear from the conversation that he was prudent in his actions to look at the actual data itself, look at the bottom line, and from there say based on their particular contextual business that being in the cloud does not work for them. And so I don't have a problem with it. Let me know what you think. Thank you for listening in on An Article a Day. I'm Vernon Reed with Steph Partners. Have a great weekend. I'll talk to you sometime too soon.